Well, hi everyone, this is Daniel. I'm the founder and owner of Brickstore. I know I haven't been as visible online in recent years as I was back in the early days of 2019 and 2020, but as Brickstore is coming to an end, I wanted to get on camera one last time and talk about the journey we've been on over the last 6 years. What it's meant to me, to my wife Anya, and to our 4 children, to build and operate a Lego store here in New Zealand. Some of these stories you may have heard before, and I have certainly told them many times over the years, but this may well be my final telling of those highs and lows we've experienced through Brickstore. But before anything else, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to our customers. You are what made Brickstore possible. Over the years, you purchased more than 100,000 Lego sets from us, and we've absolutely loved being part of your Lego hobby. Especially over the last few weeks, we've received some incredibly heartfelt emails and messages, and honestly it's been deeply moving to read them. So I thought I'd start at the beginning with my own love of Lego. Back in the 1980s, when I was probably 3 or 4 years old, my dad brought home my very first Lego set from overseas. I think it was this one, set 402, the Universal Building set. At that time, Lego wasn't available in New Zealand, but my dad travelled frequently and he would often bring home Lego for me and my sister. Some of those sets are still with me today. Sets like 6363 Auto Repair Shop, 6970 the Beta 1 Command Base, and 4015 Freighter. I absolutely played with those sets to death. Every brick had teeth marks, every printed piece was rubbed blank, and they really were my most beloved toys. As I got older, the obsession never fully disappeared. At 13 or 14 I was still collecting Lego catalogues, but I wasn't receiving Lego anymore for birthdays or Christmases. And so I entered my Lego dark ages. It wasn't until 2012 I walked into Toy World with my 2-year-old and stopped to have a look at what modern Lego had become. What grabbed me were the trains. As a kid, I'd always dreamed of owning Lego trains. So I finally decided to fulfill that childhood dream and bought the sets 3677 Red Cargo Train, 7939 Cargo Train, and 7938 Passenger Train. And then things escalated quickly. I started building a Lego city around the trains, then suddenly I decided I needed all the Star Wars sets, and then I needed all the Creator Expert sets, and so on. Well, within a few years, I'd accumulated well over 100 sets. But after a house move, I realised something important. I had more Lego than I could realistically ever build and enjoy. So I decided to start selling some sets on TradeMe, and honestly, I was shocked at what people were willing to pay. Some sets were selling for 2, 3, even 5 times what I'd originally paid for them. And that was the moment I realised that Lego wasn't just a hobby, it was a fascinating business opportunity. Somewhere during those early years, I decided to make a start on real Lego investing. I remember seeing the original UCS Millennium Falcon set 10179 selling online for something like 5,000 US dollars. At the time, that seemed completely insane to me. Part of me thought, I wish I'd bought a warehouse full of these things back when they were still on shelves. For a long time, retired Lego sets followed this pattern where rare and desirable sets just kept climbing higher and higher in value. And honestly, for a while, it really did feel like Lego was almost this magical investment category where certain sets could seemingly only go up. But then something interesting started happening. Lego began revisiting some of these legendary sets and releasing newer versions that were often extremely similar to the originals. The original Falcon was followed by 75192. 10189 Taj Mahal became 10256. Batman Tumbler 76023 became 76240. And suddenly these once almost mythical sets, which only the wealthy collectors could realistically afford, became accessible again to ordinary Lego fans. From a fan perspective, I think this was fantastic. But from an investment perspective, it completely changed the landscape. A lot of people who had treated Lego as a guaranteed appreciating asset suddenly discovered that values could absolutely fall as well as rise. And over time, I think that changed the psychology around Lego collecting quite a lot. The reality is that Lego is still ultimately a manufactured product. It's not rare art. Lego can always choose to revisit an idea, remake a set, or release something even better, and honestly, I think that's probably healthier for the hobby in the long run. But anyway, let's get back to my story. So I started buying more and more sets. Instead of one, I'd buy 2 or 3 and then 4 or 5. I was carefully choosing themes and sets I thought would hold long-term demand. And somewhere during all of that, the idea for Brickstore was born. I came up with the name and ran a design competition for the logo. I was really happy with the winning entry until Lego's lawyers contacted me and informed me that the minifigure head was a registered trademark and needed to be removed. So the minifigure head was changed to a Lego brick instead. After about 2 years of buying stock, I'd built up an inventory of over 2,000 sets. And throughout 2019, I started promoting the upcoming website through Facebook groups and local Lego communities. And I also exhibited at the 2019 Lego show, where I ran giveaways to build up our mailing list. Then on November 12th, 2019, Brickstore officially launched. In that first week, we averaged 10 orders a day and I was wrapped. Then just 4 months after launch, in March 2020, the world changed. The COVID lockdowns began. Suddenly people were stuck at home looking for something positive to focus on, and Lego became one of those things. Our sales absolutely exploded. At times we were processing 100 plus orders a day, and there were days where I was working 14 hours just to keep up. People were quarantining in hotels for 2 weeks at a time, and during that period we decided to give away $3,000 worth of Lego to returning New Zealanders who emailed us their boarding passes. That immediately took off, and the New Zealand Herald picked up the story and wrote about it. I didn't know, and a friend messaged me and asked, "Daniel, are you really doing this?" We also started our daily build challenges on Facebook, where our followers could submit creations to win Lego prizes, and that was genuinely one of the most fun parts of the business. Here are some of the highlights from those builds. It didn't take long until all the stock I'd accumulated over previous years had sold out, and I was buying Lego anywhere I could. Truckloads from New Zealand retailers, shipments from overseas suppliers, daily courier arrivals. Sometimes import duties completely destroyed the margins because I hadn't factored them in. But during COVID, momentum mattered more than profit. People were paying genuinely crazy money for certain sets. It felt like normal logic around spending had temporarily disappeared. And honestly, the whole thing became overwhelming. There's a saying that if you want to ruin a hobby, turn it into a business. And I started to understand exactly what that meant. Despite the success, I was exhausted. By the end of that first year, I was seriously burned out and explored selling the business. But instead, I decided to try one more thing, becoming an official Lego retail partner. I'd originally approached Lego years earlier, when the business was just an idea, but back then I didn't really have a story or a business case to present. Now I did. And a few months later, in March 2021, Brickstore officially became a direct Lego partner, and this was a huge milestone for us. Around this time, our house had effectively become a warehouse. We could barely move through some rooms, and our family life was increasingly revolving around cartons, pallets, packing benches, and courier pickups. So eventually I made the decision to move fulfillment to a third-party logistics provider in Auckland. And unfortunately, this became one of the hardest chapters in Brickstore's history. Orders were delayed, orders were shipped twice, stock disappeared, communication was poor. I lost a lot of sleep during that period because we had worked incredibly hard to build a reputation for fast shipping and reliable service, and suddenly that reputation felt out of our control. But eventually things did stabilise, but not before tens of thousands of dollars worth of stock went missing, and we ended up taking legal action to recover those losses. By early 2024, Anya, our boys, and I made the move north to Kerikeri, where Anya grew up. Around that time, I made a decision to bring fulfillment back under our own control. We leased a warehouse in Kerikeri town centre, and over several days I drove truckloads of Lego from Auckland to Northland. Honestly, it felt really good to take ownership of the operation again. And I like to think customers notice the difference too. Faster shipping, better packing, and more care. But by this stage, the economics of the business were changing significantly. Sales remained strong, but profits continued shrinking. Interest rates in New Zealand had risen sharply, consumer spending had tightened, and Lego is ultimately a luxury product. The only way to maintain sales volume was through increasingly aggressive discounting, and eventually the numbers simply stopped making sense. The reality is that Lego retail is a very low margin business, and while profitability was certainly part of our decision to close, it wasn't the only reason. Over time, I also found myself thinking more deeply about consumerism and environmental impact. We worked hard to make the business as sustainable as possible. We used recyclable packaging, encouraged soft plastic recycling, and even donated toward tree planting for a period. But I also became increasingly aware of how much consumption modern retail encourages. Truckloads of Lego would arrive from Auckland, and by that same afternoon, half of it would be heading straight back there in courier vans. And while I still absolutely love Lego, I think part of me has become less comfortable participating in the endless cycle of buying more and more stuff. One thing I never really felt particularly good about was buy now, pay later services. I've always believed that if you can't afford something today, going into debt for a luxury item probably isn't the best idea. Even during our final clearance sales, I've often found myself thinking, if this wasn't heavily discounted, would people even buy it? They're complicated feelings, and I'm not pretending to have all the answers, but they become part of the bigger picture for me. That said, there were also so many incredible moments. One of my favourites was visiting Billund, Denmark, with my family in 2023, the birthplace of Lego itself. I had the incredible privilege of visiting Lego headquarters and seeing spaces that aren't normally open to the public. And of course, we visited Lego House, which honestly felt a bit like a pilgrimage for lifelong Lego fans. And then there were the April Fool's jokes. Those became one of my favourite traditions every year. In 2021, we announced the Block Me set, a 20,000 piece set that allowed customers to build a life-size version of themselves. In 2023, we introduced Lego Potting Mix as an accessory for the botanical range, and in 2025, we announced that we would start shipping Lego without boxes to make deliveries feel more exciting. Some people fell for those far more than they probably should have. And before we finish, I want to share a few statistics from the last 6 years. We processed a total of 61,260 orders, with an average order value of $197. Our biggest sales day was November 23rd of 2021, when we processed 173 orders in a single day. We had 54 days where order numbers exceeded 100. Our biggest selling set was Lego Creator Expert Flower Bouquet, with 492 units sold. Second was Lego Creator 3-in-1 Medieval Castle with 442 units sold. And third was Lego Ideas Central Perk with 419 units sold. Across the 6 years, we sold more than 110,000 Lego sets that contained over 78 million bricks. And the big one, we sold 238 UCS Millennium Falcons, which retail for $1,500 each. And finally, I want to thank the hardest working member of the Brickstore team, 2Pack Secure, our trusty packing machine, which, by the way, is now for sale. But seriously, I want to say thank you. Thank you for every order, every email, every message, every build photo, every recommendation to friends and family, and every bit of support over the last 6 years. Brickstore became far bigger than I ever imagined it would. That little kid in the 1980s chewing the prints off his Lego bricks could never have imagined that one day he'd end up running New Zealand's biggest independent Lego store. It's been an incredible chapter in our lives, and while it's time for us to move on, Lego will always be an important and nostalgic part of me. So thank you everyone, and farewell.